Welcome back to Latin American Today. My name is Rene. What does it mean to follow Jesus right now? What does it mean to be Latin American today? Those two questions that started this podcast. And every episode, we come back to them. We turn them over. We look at them from a different angle. Today, I want to come at the second one from a direction that may make you uncomfortable. Because I want to talk about the word Latin American. I want to talk about where it came from, who made it up, who it serves, and who it erases. I want to talk about the names we've been given and the name I've chosen for myself. This episode is called Cuscatleco. Stay with me, I'll explain. We'll start with somewhat of a current event. May 12, 2026, Movistar Arena, Madrid, Spain. Arcángel, a Puerto Rican reggaeton artist, one of the biggest names in the genre right now. He stops his concert mid-set, puts down the energy for a second, he turns to the crowd, and he says this. Y las calles, y las escuelas, y las iglesias se construyeron para que tú fueras educado hoy en día. What about the streets, the schools, the churches they built so you could be educated today? And then, España no tiene que pedirle disculpas a nadie. Nosotros éramos indios. Llegó esta gente y nos pusieron a hablar. Spain doesn't owe anyone an apology. We were Indians. These people arrived and made us speak. He said this on a stage in Madrid to Spaniards who applauded. He apologized a few days later, said he never meant to disrespect Latin America or indigenous people. Carlos Vives, a beloved Colombian artist, came out and said Arcángel was basically right, that the conquest produced something real, a cultural mix that built the world we live in. And then, Raúl Alejandro said this, and I want you to hear it. The cultural exchange between peoples could have been built without blood, without slavery, and without erasing identities or beliefs. Yes, exactly. But here's what I want to tell you. This episode is not about canceling Arcángel. It's not what we're here to do. The outrage cycle is not interesting to me. What is interesting to me is the mirror. Arcángel is Puerto Rican. His ancestors are Taino, the indigenous people of the Caribbean. The people Spain nearly wiped off the face of the earth within 60 years of Columbus' arrival. And he stood in Madrid and said, Nosotros éramos indios. We were Indians in a past tense, as if indigenous identity is something that happened to someone else long ago, and then it was over. That's not ignorance. That's not stupidity. That is the deepest, most painful result of 500 years of colonial education. When the descendants of the colonized become the defenders of the colonizer. That's what this episode is about. Not him, this. What was done to us that made that moment possible. So, what does Spain give us? Let's engage the argument directly, because it deserves a direct answer. The argument goes that Spain brought civilization, built churches, roads, schools, give us the Spanish language, a language that now connects 500 million people. Without the conquest, we'd have nothing. Okay, let's be precise. Let's talk about what Spain actually brought. The encomienda. The encomienda system was Spain's primary tool for extracting wealth from the Americans. Spanish colonizers were granted not land, but people. Indigenous people were assigned to them as workers, forced labor, in the mines, in the fields, in the houses. When the workers died, and they died fast, they were replaced. There was no shortage of indigenous people to replace them with at first. The Mita. In the Andes, Spain used a system called the Mita. It's a rotational forced labor draft. Indigenous men were taken from their communities, marched to the silver mines of Potosí in what is now Bolivia, and put underground. The mine was so deadly that the surrounding communities built their own cemeteries in advance. They knew the men were not coming back. The silver from Potosí built the Spanish Empire. It funded the wars, the palaces, the churches. It funded the streets and the schools and the churches that Arcangel mentioned. Every single one of them was built on the bodies of people who were worked to death. Slavery. When indigenous populations began to collapse because they were dying faster than they could be replaced, Spain began importing enslaved Africans, millions of them, across 2 centuries. Approximately 5 million Africans were brought to Latin America in chains. That is roughly 40% of the entire transatlantic slave trade. The economy of empire ran on black and indigenous bodies. That is not a metaphor. That is accounting. The Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was extended to the Americas in 1569. Torture and execution awaited anyone who practiced indigenous spiritual traditions. African religious practices were deviated from Catholic orthodoxy. The faith was not offered, it was enforced. The churches, the schools, the streets. The churches Arcangel mentioned, let me tell you about the churches. Many of them were built on top of indigenous temples, literally, physically on top of. The stone of the temples were torn down and used as foundation for the churches. The sacred sites of entire civilizations were buried under Christian architecture. The schools existed to teach in Spanish, specifically to erase indigenous languages. I talked about that in episode 2, the Real Cédula of 1770, where King Carlos III and his royal decree to extinguish indigenous languages across the empire. The schools were instruments of cultural instruction. The streets and roads connected extraction points to ports. They were not built to connect communities. They were built to move silver and sugar out as fast as possible to Spain. So the streets, churches, and schools, built by indigenous and enslaved African hands on stolen land over mass graves to serve the extractive needs of a foreign empire. That is what Spain gave us. You don't thank someone for a house they built on your grave. Now, I want to shift because this episode is not only about what happened 500 years ago. It's about what's happening right now, in the language we use, and the categories we accept. I want to talk about names. Hispanic, for example. The word Hispanic is an identity category, as a box you check on a form. It was officially introduced by the United States federal government in the 1970 census under Richard Nixon's administration. Think about that. The identity that millions of people carry, the shapes, how they are seen in North America, how they access resources, how they are counted politically. It was invented in a government office in Washington, D.C. in 1970 to solve an administrative program. The word itself comes from Hispania, the Roman name for the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, the colonizers. The word Hispanic centers the colonizer linguistically. It says, what we have in common is Spain. I don't have Spain at my center. My center is Cojutepeque, El Salvador. My center is the foot of Cerro de las Pavas. My center is a people who were speaking Nahuatl for centuries before any European ever set foot on their land. What about Latino, Latina? Latino is a broader term. It includes Brazil. It's not tied to Spanish specifically, but it still lumps together 20 plus nations, hundreds of distinct indigenous peoples, multiple African diasporas, and communities that have almost nothing in common except geography and a shared history of colonization. A Peruvian Quechua speaker, a Cuban American in Miami, a Salvadoreño in BC, an Argentine of Italian descent who has never left Buenos Aires, all Latino. That category tells you almost nothing about any of them. What about Latinx or Latine? Latine? Latinx? Latine? These terms emerged in the United States from academic and activist circles. They're trying to address the gender binary embedded in Spanish. The intention is genuine and I understand it. But study after study shows these terms are rejected by the overwhelming majority of the communities they claim to include. Some surveys put that number at 98%. The people who are supposed to be represented by Latinx don't use it, don't want it. And there's a deep irony here. Taking a language you don't speak and imposing a linguistic solution on it for a community you are trying to be in solidarity with, that itself is a form of cultural imposition. Doing it with good intentions doesn't make it not an imposition. None of these names came from us. Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latine. None of these names existed before colonization. None of them were chosen by the peoples they describe. They were all created outside of us, by governments, by bureaucracies, by academics, by ad agencies. I'll get to that in a minute. And every single one of them carries a hidden assumption that the thing we have in common is our relationship to Spain, to European colonization, to the process that tried to erase who we actually were. I'm not Latino. I'm not Hispanic. I'm Salvadoreño. That's a nation, a people, a specific piece of earth with a specific history and a specific peoples who lived there long before anyone gave it its current name. And if the name should come from the land, from the people who were there before the colony, before the republic, before every external label, then the name is Cuscatleco. But it's not just that these categories are external, it's that they carry a hierarchy inside of them, a racial hierarchy, and that hierarchy is not accidental, it was built in. Latinidad has a face. Think about the face of Latino in North American media, in commercials, in TV shows, in political campaigns. Who do you see? The scholar Arlene Davila documented this in her landmark book, Latinos, Inc. She traced how Madison Avenue in the 1990s constructed the Hispanic market as a unified consumer category. They needed a single face to sell to and to sell through. The face they chose was urban, mostly Mexican or Caribbean, often light-skinned, aspirationally modern, stylish. It was never indigenous, never visibly black, never Central American, never the face of someone whose grandmother spoke Nahuatl or Mam or Quechua or Garifuna, never someone who looks like my father. The market built an image of Latinidad that was palatable. And palatable meant not too dark, not too indigenous, not too African, not too specific. There's a blanqueamiento across Latin America, not just in North American media, but in the countries themselves. The colonial project promoted what is called blanqueamiento, whitening. The idea was this: racial mixture was inevitable. So let's move it in the right direction, upward, towards whiteness. Mestizo was better than indigenous. White was better than mestizo. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, several Latin American governments actively encouraged European migration, specifically to improve the race. Those are not my words. That's in the historical record. Turn on a telenovela. Look at who plays the wealthy families, who plays the educated professional, who plays the servant. The colorism is not subtle. It is the entire visual grammar of the genre. This is latinidad, as it is experienced by hundreds of millions of people every day. A hierarchy that tells you the closer you are to whiteness, the more fully human you are. The more indigenous you look, the more African, the further you are from the center. And the hierarchy is still running. I want to be honest about something personal here. I grew up between worlds. In El Salvador, where people know my father, and they can see his features, El Indio, there's a response to that. A particular kind of look, an assumption about where you stand. When I'm in Canada, I'm Latino, a category that was built for me by people who have never been to Cojutepeque, who don't know what the Cerro de las Pavas looks like, who cannot tell a Pipil descendant from anyone else. In both places, there's a hierarchy running. In both places, the colonial script is still being performed. Arcángel saying, nosotros éramos indios, in past tense, is that hierarchy speaking. To claim indigenous identity in the present tense is a threat to a system that spent 500 years telling indigenous people they should want to be something else, should want to be civilizado, should want to be mestizo, should want to be white. Past tense is safer. Past tense puts it behind you. But it's not behind us. It is in us. And I want to talk about the people who were there before Latin America, before Hispanic, before El Salvador, before Spain, before any of these names. There were peoples, living peoples with languages, governance, spiritual practice, trade, agriculture, architecture, medicine, astronomy, poetry. In the territory now called El Salvador, the Pipil, speaking Nahuatl, a language related to Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica people, the people of the Tenochtitlan, present since at least the 9th century before Christ, possibly earlier. I talked about Nahuatl in episode 2. I talked about how the Real Cédula of 1770 was a royal decree designed specifically to extinguish indigenous languages, how the words survive anyway, hidden inside Spanish. Tomate, chocolate, aguacate, maíz, cacao, comal, chile. The language survived inside the mouth of the language that tried to kill it. Now the Taíno, Arcángel's own ancestors. Let's go back to Arcángel a little bit because this part matters. At the time of Columbus' first contact, the Taíno people may have numbered between 1 and 2 million across the Caribbean. They had complex societies, trade networks, agricultural systems, ceremonial architecture. Within 60 years, they had been reduced to near extinction. Forced labor in gold mines, starvation when food production was disrupted to feed the mines, disease that swept through bodies that had no immunity, physical violence, mass killing. By 1802, Spanish colonial authorities officially declared the Taíno extinct on the census. They simply stopped counting them. Researchers now call these paper genocide. Administrative eraser. If you stop writing people down, they stop existing on paper. But here is what DNA says. 61% of Puerto Ricans carry Taíno mitochondrial DNA. In one study, 164 Puerto Ricans tested, every single one matched Taíno genetic markers. Every single one. Arcángel is Taíno. His blood is Taíno. He stood in Madrid, in the capital of the empire that declared his ancestor extinct in 1802 and said, Nosotros éramos indios. We were, past tense. I don't want to shame him. I say to name what happened to him, what was done to him over 5 centuries, what was done to all of us. Erased twice, by colonization, then by latinidad. Here's what breaks my heart. Pueblos Originarios, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, were first erased by colonization, by the sword, by the mines, by decree, the census that stopped counting them. And then they were erased a second time, by latinidad, by the category that was supposed to represent us. Latinidad has no language for indigenous peoples except as background, as folklore, as roots that gave us some interesting food, words, and colorful textiles we can sell at craft markets. It has no language for them as present tense peoples, with living languages, ongoing land struggles, political movements, and unbroken cultural continuity. When the Latino community organizes politically in the United States or in Canada, the interests of indigenous peoples within that community are almost never centered. The face of the movement is mestizo at best. The languages of the movement are Spanish and English. The Mam speaker, the Nahuatl speaker, the Quechua speaker, their background again. This is not accident. This is the colonial hierarchy reproduced inside the category that was supposed to unite us. There are over 800 distinct indigenous languages still spoken in the Americas. Over 800. Many of them with very few speakers. Each one of them is a world. Each one that goes silent is a world that goes dark. And we call ourselves Latino and don't think about any of them. Now, Latin America has 3 roots, 3 foundational peoples: indigenous, European, African. The third root, African, is the one Latinidad consistently forgets or deliberately ignores. The myth that mestizaje presents Latin America as a blend of indigenous and Spanish. The African presence is treated as regional. Brazil, Cuba, the coast of Colombia, an exception, a local variation. It is not an exception. It is foundational. There are 5 million people. Spain and Portugal brought approximately 5 million enslaved Africans to the Americas. That's roughly 40% of the entire transatlantic slave trade. 40%. Afrodescendant communities exist across every single country in Latin America, including countries where they are rarely acknowledged, including El Salvador. Yes, El Salvador. There's a documented Afro-Salvadorian population, descendants of enslaved Africans brought during the colonial period. They have been systematically erased from the national narrative. The official story of El Salvador is a mestizo story, indigenous and Spanish. The African root is not in the textbooks, not in the national identity, not in the flag. What about the Garifuna? Let me tell you a little bit about the Garifuna people. The Garifuna are a community of African and indigenous descent, specifically Arawak and Kalinago ancestry, living in the Caribbean coast of Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. They have their own language, their own music, punta, their own cuisine, their own spiritual practice. UNESCO recognized Garifuna language, dance, and music as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2001. And most of the people in this podcast community have never heard of them. They are Central American. They are us. And Latinidad barely has a word for them. Now, the same logic, the same whitening logic that erased indigenous identity in the 19th century was applied to blackness. Deny it, minimize it, assimilate it into mestizo. In many countries, census categories made it administratively impossible to identify as black for generations. You were mestizo whether you wanted to be or not. Entire communities with African roots were taught not to claim them, because claiming them became a stigma, with exclusion, with the bottom of the hierarchy. Latinidad didn't invent this erasure, but it reproduces it. Every time it presents a unified, vaguely mestizo face as our community, it runs the hierarchy again. And the people at the bottom of the hierarchy, indigenous, Afrodescendants, visibly not European, look at the face and know they are not the center of these. They never were. Let me tell you a little bit about my father. People called him El Indio. His whole life, it was not an insult. It was a recognition. It was what you could see in his face, in his features, in the way he carried himself. El Indio, present tense, not past, not éramos. My family is from Cojutepeque, a small city in the Cuscatlán department of El Salvador, at the foot of Cerro de las Pavas, a mountain that has been there for 10,000 years. That mountain was there before the Spanish arrived. It was there before the colony, before the republic, before every flag and every name anyone has given that piece of land. My DNA tells a story too. 40% Native American El Salvador region. The numbers don't lie. Almost half of me is indigenous to that land, to Cerro de las Pavas, to the Pipil people who called it home. I have a memory. I'm in Canada on a bus. Someone says something to me about where I'm from, about how I look, about not belonging here. The particular kind of thing that happens when you're brown in a white space. And in that moment, I felt it. What it means to be in between. Not white enough to be Canadian. Not mestizo enough to be the face of Latino that's on the posters. Not named by any of the categories anyone has built. Somewhere in the middle of it all. Taking up space in a way that doesn't fit any box. That in between is not a waiting room. That in between is where I live. That in between is a place, and it has a name. Now, before Spain arrived, the territory we now call El Salvador had a name. The Pipil people, Nahuatl speakers, my ancestors, called it Cuscatlán. It means lugar de piedras preciosas, the place of precious jewels, a name of beauty, a name of abundance, a name that carries reverence for the land and for the people who lived on it. When Spain arrived, they renamed it. The territory became part of the Captaincy General of Guatemala. Then it became the Republic of El Salvador, named after Jesus Christ himself, the colonizer's God, El Salvador, the Savior. The name of the country was an act of Christian colonial imposition. The name Cuscatlán survived, barely. It's the name of a department, an archaeological site, a shopping mall, of all things. But the name survived. I want to recover it. Not as nostalgia, not as romanticism, as precision. The land had a name before you renamed it. And I know what it was. So what am I? Not Latino. That word was invented in a government office. Not Hispanic. That word was invented to center the colonizer. Not Latinx. The word was invented by people trying to fix a problem that was not theirs to fix. Salvadoreño. That's a nation, a history, a people, a specific love. And if the name should come from the land, from the original peoples, from the Nahuatl speakers, from the people who were there before the colony, before the republic, before the mall with the wrong name, then the name is Cuscatleco. Arcángel said, nosotros éramos indios, we were Indians. My DNA is 47% Native American, present tense. The word chocolate is in my mouth every time I say it. Nahuatl, present tense. Somos, we are. The conquest did not finish what it started. And naming that out loud, in my own voice, in my own podcast, It's not anger. It is simply the truth. So what does it mean to follow Jesus right now? What does it mean to be Latin American today? Today's episode is part of an answer to the second question, or the beginning of one. It means refusing the categories that were built to contain you without your permission. It means knowing that Hispanic was invented in 1970 by a government that needed a box. It means knowing that Latinidad was built with a hierarchy inside of it, and that hierarchy is still running. It means knowing that Pueblos Originarios and Pueblos Afrodescendientes are not background, are not past tense, are not footnotes. They are present. They are us. And Latinidad has been failing them for as long as it has existed. It means knowing your father's nickname is not a relic, it's a root. One more thing briefly. Arcangel mentioned the churches, and I've been hard on the churches today. Rightly, the church was a tool of conquest. The cross and the sword traveled together, and yet faith survived. It changed shape. It mixed with indigenous spiritual practice, with African spiritual practice, with the particular experience of the in-between, of the diaspora, of the people who had everything taken and somehow kept a thread of the sacred. Many of us carry a faith that was imposed on our ancestors by force, and have found within something real, something that holds us. That's not contradiction. That's the complexity of being exactly who we are. That tension between what was taken and what was kept and what was transformed is worth more episodes, and we'll get there. You code switch at work, at home, at church. In Latin America, you're the one who left. In Canada, you're the immigrant. Someone says you're Hispanic, someone says you're Latino, someone says you're Latinx, someone says your people were civilized by colonization. And somewhere in the middle of all that, underneath all of it, there's a name that predates every box, a name that comes from the land itself, from the people who were there first, from the mouth of your ancestors. Find that name, learn it, say it out loud. Somos, we are, present tense, always. Hasta la próxima.